Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey. In today's video, I'll be running you through all of the key information to help you get set up ahead of Game Week 22, including an extensive analysis on who the best captain is this game week. Right then, so let's get started by looking at my Game Week 21 team performance. It was looking like a huge red arrow going into last night, that being Thursday evening, with about a 200k red arrow and only two players left to play, that being João Pedro and Amad Diallo. We'll talk about Amad in a second, but João Pedro wasn't injured out, and I was kind of hoping that he'd be rested against Ipswich so he could play against Man United over the weekend. Obviously, the reason I was hoping for that is because I've got Semenyo with 12 points stuck on my bench. I was really hoping he'd come in for João Pedro there, but no such luck. And obviously, João Pedro gets taken off early. He gets a yellow card and a 1-pointer away at Ipswich. Not great data either. So that was very, very frustrating. And with about 10 minutes to go of the Man United-Southampton game, I was thinking that it was one of my worst game weeks of the season. Enter Amad Diallo, who, whilst I support Southampton, obviously I'm very upset that we managed to bin a 1-0 away lead at Old Trafford. From an FPL point of view, that is probably the moment of the season for me. We've got a hat-trick in 10 minutes at the end of the game week to save me from an absolutely monumental red arrow. And what it's done is effectively given me a grey arrow for the first time, I think, ever in my FPL career. It was technically a red arrow of about 40, maybe 30 places, which is kind of wild when you consider the hundreds of thousands of people playing. Unless you're ranked somewhere in the top 10 in the world, it's very, very rare to be getting anywhere near a grey arrow like that. So I'm counting it as a grey just because it's kind of fun to do so, and I don't really want to count it as a red. It is technically a red though, so I should state that. Elsewhere in my team, outside of the Amad Diallo miracle hat-trick, who, by the way, put up great data and looks like a good pick moving forwards, the Arsenal double clean sheet wipeout was very frustrating once again, but the data is still decent. I'll go on to that later on in the video. Trent conceded but did start, and I didn't really have too many doubts about him playing. He's still one of the best right-backs in the world, very crucial to the way that Liverpool play. And honestly, with a double game week coming and Ipswich in game week 23, there's just simply no way I can comprehend getting rid of him, unless of course it was to another Liverpool player perhaps, but I still think he's putting up good enough data that he'll be worth the money, and he's not worth a transfer out for me at this point in time. Lewis Hall getting a clean sheet, but he is pretty well owned at the moment, and the only other players in my starting 11 who got points were Palmer and Isak, who, although obviously it's great that I have them, the fact that Palmer was over 100% effective ownership against me because of all the captainers, and Isak was, I think, 97.5% effective ownership, meant that I got almost no benefit from Isak whatsoever, and I actually got hurt by Palmer scoring points. I captained the wrong player, I put it on Salah, and looking back, I don't want to be too hindsighty, but maybe it was more of an opportunity than I gave it credit for. I do still back Salah. I think obviously he's an incredible player, and even away from home at some of the best opponents, I don't think it was a bad call necessarily to put the armband on him, but we're an outcome driven game. Palmer and Isak both had great fixtures and great matchups in terms of stylistically, and maybe I should have been seeing it more of an opportunity to have Palmer or Isak as my captain. So hands up, I may have called that one incorrectly, but I don't want to be too hindsighty just because Salah didn't get the points. He did get opportunities towards the end of the game to score points, and if he got just one return, then this would have been a pretty healthy green arrow, and I wouldn't even be talking about it. So the way it goes is obviously Palmer captainers, Isak captainers, feel free to show off and gloat in the comments. Tell me what points you scored for Game Week 21 and whether or not you beat my score of 68. So no messing about, let's crack on with the captaincy matrix because it's a detailed analysis today and a really close call on which the best captain is going into Game Week 22. Now, first up, there's a new entrant to this spreadsheet. Chris Wood has entered the mix, and although he wouldn't normally be in the captaincy conundrum for any given game week, the fixture and the form does throw him into the conversation. And a lot of people are questioning whether or not maybe we should be targeting that Southampton home fixture as a potential to go against the crowd and go slightly more differential on captaincy. He is pretty well owned now. I think it will be above 50, maybe even 60% effective ownership in the top million, but I still think in terms of captaincy, it will be relatively differential. Now, the reason he's appeared here, and a lot of people are talking about him, is because Southampton, quite frankly, are awful. Now, they are the worst team in the league with their expected goals conceded by quite a long margin. They've expected to concede, I believe, 3, maybe even 4 more goals than any other club after 21 games, which is a pretty hefty margin. And outside of that, just looking subjectively at what happened at the end of game week 21, in those last 10 minutes, although there was a pretty strong fight and a decent defensive display against Man United up until that point, conceding 3 late on against United probably means they're going to be bereft of confidence. And Nottingham Forest and Chris Wood, who are both in fantastic form right now, they've got to be in the consideration. Now, for me, obviously, I don't own Chris Wood anyway, so he's not in my consideration. But even if I did, I'm not sure I would go as far as captaining him. The reason being is the data, quite frankly, just doesn't stack up against any of the other competitors in this spreadsheet or anywhere near that. If he was even slightly closer, I might consider it a little bit more. I love the matchup, and he's a great player to own this week. But 0.41 XGI per 90 is just nowhere near the sort of volume you'd want from a captaincy option. In my personal opinion, you might disagree, and that is absolutely fine. But I still back the data in situations like this. And when other players have also very good fixtures, especially some of them at home, I'd prefer to go maybe against Chris Wood, who's got much worse data. It's also a matter of shot volume. Now, Chris Wood, 1 shot, 1 goal against Liverpool pretty much, and he's seen that quite a few times this season. But if you want to bag a haul, you're going to need more than 1 shot a game. Now, I'm sure he'll get a few against Southampton, but they're a team that don't necessarily create a high volume of chances for him. The chances they do create are of a very decent quality, but you can only get 4 points from a goal, obviously bonus points attached as well. Whereas a player like Salah or Palmer, Isak or Haaland, all of them on this spreadsheet, usually get 4 or 5 shots a game, maybe even in some cases way more than that. And it just gives the upside potential to a captaincy pick. That's not to say Chris Wood's a bad option. It's just not the kind of way that I tend to play the game. And of course, I don't own him right now anyway. So unless I bring him in, which I'll talk about in a moment's time, he wouldn't even be in the captaincy consideration for me anyway. Outside of that, I want to talk about Isak and Haaland as a pair. Now, Haaland away at Ipswich, I think, is a fantastic fixture. If you've got him already, then he will be in the consideration for you. Obviously, he's not been in bad nick recently, but the data is slightly worse than Isak. He's definitely not the form player that Isak is, and it's even slightly worse than Palmer as well. Now, the other thing on Haaland is, unless you already have him, which I think is quite rare up in the top tiers right now, I wouldn't be advising to buy him, so this probably isn't a factor for most people. After this fixture, Man City go through a really tough run of fixtures, and Haaland just quite frankly won't be worth the money in that period of time. So unless you've got him already, I wouldn't be bringing him in to captain him against Ipswich. Isak against Bournemouth is also interesting. Obviously, Isak is probably the form player in the league right now. He's on a really hot streak of scoring. He's going after Vardy's record of consecutive matches, and no one would really bet against him doing so against Bournemouth. Bournemouth do equip themselves pretty well against stronger opponents though, so do watch out for that. And although the data's really good, I think that the fixtures themselves for 2 of the other competitors in this matrix are just so good that it would put me off going for Isak as a captaincy option over the other 2. Obviously, expected points really good via Fantasy Football Hub. 7.1 is definitely in the mix, and he's in great form, so I expect him to score, but I'm looking for a big haul. And although Isak's got a chance, I think Palmer and Salah provide a much better chance of an explosion against Brentford and Wolves, respectively. So moving on to my 2 favourites for this game week, and I'm sure most other people's favourites, that being Palmer and Salah. I don't personally have a massive preference on which one I'm going to pick right now. It's a very tight call, and although the expected points via Fantasy Football Hub suggest that Palmer is out in front, I really wouldn't be discounting Salah here either. So I'm going to run through a few key data points that I'm looking at to colour my opinion and maybe help me get to a decision by the end of this video. Now, starting off with Palmer, we're looking at the matchup against Wolves. First of all, now Wolves away from home, their XGC per 90, expected goals conceded per 90, is 1.46. However, they've conceded 25, which is 2.27 per game in real life. That is obviously massively over what they'd be expected to concede so far. So the data suggests perhaps they've been a little bit unlucky with the amount of goals they've conceded, but 1.46 still isn't amazing. Wolves, of course, conceded 6 in the reverse fixture to Chelsea. Palmer scoring 1 goal, getting 3 assists, so a pretty mega haul in that fixture as well. And although they've had a managerial change since then, I'd still expect Chelsea's matchup in terms of their style to favour the Wolves team quite nicely. The XGC per 90 under Pereira, if you're interested, is slightly better, 1.26 per 90, but again, it's a really small sample size, so I probably wouldn't be focusing on that too much. It is an improvement, but it's not so much of an improvement that I would say that there's a definite marked difference in their defensive ability. They do also have problems at the back right now, and again, just subjectively on the eye, in the previous game, in Gameweek 21, they got kind of broken open at regular intervals. So they're not a team that I'd be worried about putting the armband on a player who goes up against them right now. Interestingly, Palmer at home is 0.87 XGI per 90. That's slightly better than his overall average. So he runs a little bit more hot at home, and 10 points a game on average at home as well is really, really strong. Wolves, finally, concede 48% of their chances through the middle, which is where Palmer operates. So I do expect him to do really well in this fixture. But the key question is, of course, is he a better shout than Salah? Now, Salah, looking at the data there, Brentford's XGC at home, because obviously they're playing at home, not away, is 1.41, which is very slightly better than Wolves, 0.05 in it, but they've conceded 21 goals. So again, they've underperformed on their expected data in terms of their goals conceded, but they are just under 2 per game at home. So we're expecting lots of goals in both of the games. We're expecting both of these teams to concede plenty of chances, but Brentford's data at home is marginally better than what Wolves is away from home, which again is a key comparison in terms of what they've really conceded as well in real life. They've conceded under 2 a game versus 2.27 in Wolves' case. In terms of where they've conceded their chances, down that left flank, so Salah's right flank, they've conceded 21% of their chances, versus, just for comparison, down the right-hand side, they've conceded 26% of their chances. So they're ever so slightly stronger defensively down the flank that Salah will be operating down. However, again, there's probably not that much in it, and there's not enough in it that would suggest to me that it's a real strength of theirs and that Salah's going to massively struggle. In terms of Salah's data in particular, away from home, he's actually been running really hot. And as you can see, 1.07 XGI per 90 in total. Away from home, it's slightly better than that. It's 1.2 XGI per 90, which means his data away from home is actually even better than his home data. In terms of his points per game, so obviously we looked at Palmer's at home, 10 points a game is really strong for Palmer. For Salah, away from home, it's 12.68, so he's even better than Palmer, even though he's away from home. So it's an incredible performance from Salah. He's an absolute beast this season, and honestly, it's quite hard to ever pick a game where I'm confident going against him. To put matters quite frankly, I think both of them do really well this game week. I'd also add Isak into there as well. He will also probably do really well against Bournemouth. But in terms of chasing a mega haul, both Palmer and Salah have a really decent opportunity of getting 10 plus points and getting multiple returns. I think the way that I'm leaning right now, because it's so tight, it could go down to the wire, but if I had to pick right this second, I think I'd slightly favour the home fixture for Palmer, although the points per game in terms of his output are slightly lower than Salah's. the fact that Wolves are conceding 2.27 goals per game is just enough to maybe tip me over the edge. I think they're slightly more susceptible. They look leaky through the middle. And considering what I saw on the pitch in Game Week 21, I'd be surprised if they're able to shore up that defensive line enough to prevent Palmer from going gangbusters. Right then, so I've got 4 free transfers to play with. And what that means is I've got an absolute ton of routes that I could take with my transfers this week. I'm not going to go through all of these different options at great detail, but just as an illustration for basically where my mind's at right now, I wanted to show all of the different routes that I could take and that I am actually considering. So all of these are within consideration, and at different points this week, I've been maybe sat on one of these different options as my preferred one. I'll obviously go through what my preferred pick is right now, but starting off with option number 1, Jackson to Chris Wood was maybe my first instinct after Jackson underperformed yet again in Game Week 21. Very frustrating player to own, and I won't go into detail on him right now because yesterday's video, my transfer options video, do go check that out. I do a detailed analysis on Jackson, Wood and Pedro in terms of whether or not Wood is worth bringing in for Jackson, for Pedro, who is obviously also a potential transfer out on this spreadsheet, or whether or not to just leave it be. Now, this is an easy move. I can do it in 1 free transfer, obviously get a bit of money out of it as well, and really target a fantastic fixture at home to Southampton. My key hesitation on Wood at the moment is that once the Southampton fixture is out the way, I'm not so sure that I'm going to absolutely love owning him. His data's all right, but it's not fantastic. And although he's a very good player on a hot streak right now, and Nottingham Forest are also a very good team, the fixtures do take a little bit of a turn. Now, if I already owned him, it would be a slightly different matter. Now, Southampton's a great fixture, obviously, no worries there. After that, I think you can probably hold on to him pretty comfortably all the way through to Game Week 25. But I don't think the fixtures after Southampton in Game Week 22 are that good that he'd be a definite buy if you didn't already have him. So for me, it's all coming down to whether or not I think the Southampton fixture is good enough that it's worth using a pretty precious free transfer to target him, or whether or not it's worth leaving that to one side, especially because the player that I'd be getting rid of, Nico Jackson, is putting up excellent data, has been very frustrating in terms of output, but he's getting close to scoring quite a few goals right now. And as frustrating as he is, I'm a data-led manager, and with the fixtures coming, I do kind of get the feeling that getting rid of him now might be a mistake I'll look back on in the future and say, the data was great, the fixtures were great, why did you lose faith at this exact moment? Obviously, I completely understand why some people are getting rid of him, and I'm not saying it's a bad decision to do so whatsoever, but maybe I'm just being a little bit stubborn. I just have this gut feeling that getting rid of Jackson now is going to be an opportunity missed, because I think he's about to go pretty wild over the next few game weeks. It's a great set of fixtures, loads of great home games in there, and I just don't really get the feeling that he's a must sell right now. After that, option 2 is another 1 free transfer move. That would be Mbermo to Anthony Gordon. Now, all things considered, I think this is probably my preferred move right now. As I said, I've got 4 free transfers. This is very sidewaysy, but the way I want to plan this out, I'll show you in just a moment's time, looking at FPL.team, that I can do this for a couple of game weeks, target the Bournemouth and the Southampton game for Anthony Gordon, whilst Mbermo goes up against Liverpool and Crystal Palace, and then I can hop across to someone else ahead of game week 24, or just reverse transfer and go back to Mbermo for his good run at that point in time. So it's a short-term move, no question about it whatsoever, but because I've got a few free transfers in the bank and I can easily reverse it back anyway, and quite frankly, that third midfield spot, the 7 to 8 million position, is someone that come game week 24 when Liverpool have a double, I might want to move on that position to a Luis Diaz or a Diogo Jota anyway. So making this move and getting rid of Mbermo ahead of Liverpool and Crystal Palace probably is a decision that sits quite well with me. In terms of some more aggressive moves, they obviously get more and more complex here, so I won't go into them in detail. I talked about options 3 and 4 at length in my transfer options video yesterday, if you want a more detailed discussion, but it mainly revolve around using João Pedro as a route to Chris Wood. Now, obviously, I don't have the money to do that in one move, so I'd have to downgrade elsewhere. My two preferred options to do that would be, number one, get rid of Gabriel. Arsenal defence, very frustrating. And downgrading him to Daniel Munoz, who has a slightly better XGI per 90, fantastic goal threat, and obviously Palace have great fixtures to come. On Gabriel and Arsenal defence in general right now, as I said earlier on in the video, I will talk about them a little bit more. They are the second best defence in the league statistically at 0.9 XGC per 90. And in terms of their actual goals conceded, it matches perfectly. 0.9 actual goals conceded per game, so per 90 minutes across the season. Now, what is unfortunate and what is frustrating about the Arsenal defence is they have an XCS, so an expected clean sheet ratio of 0.46 per 90. That means effectively in 46% of the games you'd be expecting a clean sheet so far. In actual returns, they're running at 0.33. So they're massively underperforming versus their expected clean sheet data. They've conceded 19 goals so far this season across 21 games, but their clean sheets have been very few and far between. They've kept 7 in 21 game weeks. Obviously, that's 33%, but mainly because when they have conceded goals, it's been 1 a game, which obviously wipes out the clean sheet, but their defensive data is still good. And I honestly don't think it will take much to see a bit of a turnaround there. All it would really take is a little run of good games for me to be a little bit more confident in the Arsenal defence. And guess what? Over the next 5 games, they go up against Aston Villa and Man City, fine. But outside of that, it's a great run, I believe, of Wolves, West Ham and Leicester in that time. So all things being considered, I'm not massively keen on getting rid of Gabriel, who's a massive goal threat. And also, the Arsenal defensive data suggests at least that they're about to turn a corner and maybe start producing some actual clean sheets, which would be amazing because I've got double Arsenal defence right now. The option 4 would be to get rid of Semenyo for Dibbling, but honestly, Dibbling, the data just isn't really there. It would be kind of burning a bench option for me and giving me less depth. And Semenyo's data is really strong. Obviously, just got 12 points against Chelsea, so he's in decent nick. And the fixtures for Semenyo, even though the next 3 are tough, after that, it's a great run all the way through to game week 32-33. So getting rid of him now feels like a little bit too late. And I'm not sure that unless I really, really needed the money, I'd want to downgrade him. Now, the only other option in midfield that I do like that potentially I could sell Semenyo for would come next week, that being Morgan Rogers. So to use a transfer to get rid of him now, to get Dibbling, who honestly I don't really back to get massive, massive points over the next run, and would definitely be sat on my bench for most game weeks, giving me much less depth, I'm not massively loving that either, just for the sake of getting Chris Wood for one really good game. In terms of option 5, it's the Hail Mary, so to speak. It's João Pedro, Gabriel and Mbeumo all out for Chris Wood, Munoz and Gordon. Now, for obvious reasons, I've kind of gone off of this. As I've explained, I like the Arsenal defence, and João Pedro doesn't feel like a must-sell, especially for 3 free transfers when Chris Wood has 1 great game left. It just feels like forcing it a little bit too much. Those 3 free transfers are going to be really valuable for me later on in the season with double game weeks to come. So to use 3 basically just to get Chris Wood feels like a little bit forcing it more than anything else. So I'm not loving that as an option right now, but it is a more aggressive play. Option 6 is pretty simple. It's I'm happy enough with my team right now. I don't need to force anything, and I could just roll the transfer, giving me the hailed 5 free transfers going into game week 23. However, I do have a preferred option right now. It probably is option 2, and I'll quickly run through FPL team to show what that looks like over the next few game weeks. Right then, so as promised, let's take a look at FPL team, which is a fantastic website. You should definitely go and check it out at fpl.team if you get the chance. So to start off with, let's remove Mbeumo, which is my planned transfer as it stands. And whilst it looks like a short-term move and maybe forcing it a little bit, I'll show you why it makes logical sense in my position, in my personal opinion anyway. So I've got 4 free transfers. Making this move obviously is just using one of them up, which means that I would still have 4 free transfers going into next game week ahead of game week 23. So as you can see here, I've made the move, Gordon in for Mbeumo. I think that is a marked upgrade. At home to Bournemouth for Gordon, he's got better data marginally anyway than Mbeumo. He's also in fantastic form, and in terms of the expected points, he is expected to do slightly better than Mbeumo is at home to Liverpool this week, which makes sense considering it's Bournemouth against Liverpool in terms of like the matchups one way or the other. In terms of how it looks next game week, it's absolutely lovely. So I've got 4 free transfers still. I've got triple Newcastle away at Southampton, who look like whipping boys right now. And honestly, there's not a lot that I would really massively want to do in game week 23 either, which means that I'm potentially in roll territory once again ahead of game week 24, where of course I want as many free transfers as possible in order to be able to attack the double game week for Liverpool and Everton. If I was to force a move in game week 23, as crazy as it sounds, it would likely be for either Amad Diallo or Semenyo. Now, Amad Diallo obviously just scored a hat-trick against Southampton, but he doesn't play Southampton every single game week. And whilst Fulham away isn't a bad game, the fixtures for Amad aren't amazing. They're all right. They're middling. So you've got Fulham, Crystal Palace, Spurs, Everton, Ipswich. He's not a must-sell by any means. But even if I did want to go really aggressively, just as an example, I'd be bringing in Rodgers for 1 free transfer next week to attack West Ham, Wolves and Ipswich in a 3. If that's the case, if there's no other injuries, that's really the only transfer I'm massively keen on making in game week 23. I'm really happy with the rest of my setup. We've got double Arsenal against Wolves away from home in defence. You've got double Liverpool at home to Ipswich, which looks great. You've got triple Newcastle away at Southampton. Double attack for Chelsea against Man City, which again, I think is a pretty decent matchup. And then elsewhere, you've got Rodgers and João Pedro with good fixtures for both of them. So 1 free transfer, unless injuries come in around game week 23, seems absolutely fine. And then I'm faced with a position of 4 free transfers ahead of game week 24 for the double anyway, which feels like a really strong position to be in. I don't think I'm going to go full attack on Everton. I'm probably looking at 1 Everton, maybe 2 if I really push it. But with 4 free transfers, I can only buy 1 more Liverpool player anyway. That's 1 free transfer. And then the other 2, if I'm going to use them, would be on Everton players anyway, which would also still give me a spare free transfer if I wanted it. Now, if I'm looking at which players in particular I'd be buying, the most likely outcome is I'm still using that 3rd midfield spot as kind of a transitional player for the next few game weeks. Now, if I bring in Gordon for game week 22, it would be a 2 game week play most likely for Bournemouth at home, Southampton away. Then come game week 24, I could look at bringing in someone like a Luis Diaz. So if I bring him in, easy enough on the budget, not a problem there. I've got 3 Liverpool covered already. I've made the swap away from Gordon, and I can use 1, maybe 2 free transfers to attack Everton assets. Now, if I didn't, for whatever reason, want Luis Diaz that game week, let's say I wanted Gakpo instead, I'd probably bring him in for Nicholas Jackson, and this spot here could stay as Gordon for another week, or again, just for 1 free transfer, I can just do a switch back to Mbeumo, who then has the great set of fixtures that I wanted to hold him for anyway. Starting with Spurs, West Ham, Leicester, Everton, it is a good run, so I do want Mbeumo back by that point. But he might not be a priority if I think that Luis Diaz or Diogo Jota, who could be an option at that point in time, feel like better options to attack going into the double game week. Either way, though, I've got plenty of free transfers in the bank now, and it's something I was really keen on doing in the last few game weeks, so I can go on the attack now. And although Gordon seems a little bit opportunistic and a short-term play, I think it fits in really well with my free transfer plan going up to the double game week, and it still gives me a few to play with coming out of the double game week as well, with a really strong team setup that I'm very comfortable with. So finally, let's take a look at my team selection ahead of game week 22. 4 free transfers, I've already explained where I'm probably going to be using 1 of them, and 0.4 in the bank as well. Let me know in the comments below what your team value is followers at the moment as well. Mine's 104.5 million overall. Let me know what yours is, because I get the feeling mine's kind of on the low side. I'd love it to be a little bit higher, but I've seen some really, really big team values out there, so do let me know what you're on at the moment. In terms of the way my team is set up, I've got double Arsenal defence yet again at home to Aston Villa. I don't love the fixture, but obviously Arsenal, their data is really good. They're only ever really conceding one a game anyway. I'm just hoping that they're able to keep it tight enough for the whole 90 minutes, not concede any sloppy chances or deflected shots like Son scored against them in game week 21. And if they do keep a clean sheet, obviously I'm going to get a ton of benefit there right now. Brentford away for Trent, obviously not really hopeful for a clean sheet, but I still think he's great going forward on the underlying attacking data. It's still very strong, and there's just no way I'm getting rid of a Liverpool defensive asset with Ipswich in game week 23, followed by a double of Bournemouth and Everton away from home in game week 24 as well. The only way I'd ever consider selling him is if it was for another Liverpool asset, but I don't really need the money right now, and I do still like Trent's upside, so he's not going anywhere for me personally. Hall at home to Bournemouth. Again, it's not a fixture that I'm massively expecting a clean sheet in, but Newcastle are full of surprises. They are keeping it really tight defensively at the moment, and Hall is in good form going forward too. So, at home, I do quite fancy it, and I do think there's at least a chance of a clean sheet there as well. It does sadly mean that Robinson is stuck on my bench away at Leicester though, and I'm really interested to hear who you'd bench out of this starting 11. Obviously swap in Gordon for Mbeumo, as I discussed. Who would you be benching ahead of Robinson in game week 22 with this lineup? I don't think there's a way I can really squeeze him in, maybe for Gabriel, but as I explained, the goal threat's great and Arsenal's defensive data is so good that I do still back them to do pretty well, and I know the second I bench Gabriel, he's probably going to score from a corner. Robinson over someone like a penalty taker like João Pedro is something I've considered, but I do tend to back the penalty takers, and whilst Robinson has got 9 assists so far this season, it feels fairly low upside unless he obviously gets a clean sheet and an assist. I'm only really looking at a 6-7 pointer at absolute most there. And João Pedro could easily get a couple of returns against Man United. So I'm not massively loving that. I would have considered Ahmad, but he's just scored a hat-trick and proven to me why I do need to be starting him as well. At home to Brighton is a decent enough fixture. So I just don't see a way that I can start either Robinson or Semenyo with this starting 11. Do let me know in the comments below, because I'm really interested to hear how you would start Robinson in particular. Semenyo, obviously he's doing really well against the stronger opponents, but again, you've got to back the fixture there. Newcastle have been fantastic defensively. As I discussed, I'm starting Lewis Hall. I think there's a decent chance of a clean sheet there. So Semenyo logically would be first bench for me there, but I'm expecting points once again because every time I bench him, he seems to get a haul. In terms of the other starting spots, I've already discussed Palmer and Salah. I'm leaning towards Palmer captaincy. That's going to go down to the wire, so do make sure you follow my social channels where I'll be posting my final team before the deadline, just in case I have a last minute change of heart. But right now, I am going to be going with Palmer at home to Wolves. In terms of my forward line, Jackson, Isak and Pedro. We've discussed Pedro. I don't think he's a sell right now. I think he can still do well against Man United. Isak's going nowhere. Fantastic form. I back him to score once again. Not quite in the captaincy consideration for me out of those 3 options. And Jackson gets another stay of execution. It's a fantastic fixture in terms of the data at home to Wolves, and he's got great fixtures on the horizon as well. I'm just really, really hoping he starts actually finding the back of the net. At times he's been quite unlucky. At times he's been quite poor with his finishing as well. I think it's a bit of a mixture, and I'm just hoping that the high shot volume that he's getting is going to lead to goals being scored quite soon. If it doesn't happen quite soon, it's going to keep killing my rank, and I am going to have to make a decision on him fairly soon. If everything goes wrong and he really fails against Wolves once again, then I might be tempted to look at someone like Cody Gakpo ahead of Ipswich and then the double game week against Bournemouth and Everton. For now, though, he can stay, and I'm hoping that he performs really well against Wolves because he's getting more and more differential for me, and the data is still there. So I just want to hold faith for one more week at the very least. Let me know what your questions are ahead of the deadline in the comment section below, and good luck ahead of Game Week 22. If you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, that would be really, really helpful and a massive support to the channel. Goodbye for now, and massive good luck ahead of Game Week 22.